You
Where?
went right over.
Oh.
Oh my God!
I told you.
Oh my God!
I told you it hit that. I told you it hit that. Look, it went right over here. Look at these houses.
Oh my God!
It went right
You
over.
guys okay?
This is insane. Totally insane. There's vehicles that don't even belong in this parking lot. Where is everybody?
I don't know.
May 22nd, 2011. A Sunday afternoon. Graduation day. 455 high school seniors gathered on a football field in Joplin, Missouri, celebrating the beginning of their futures. Families filled the stands, cameras clicking, capturing smiles and thrown caps against the cloudy sky. It was supposed to be one of the best days of their lives. Within hours, 7 of those graduates would be dead. This is the story of the deadliest tornado to strike the United States in 64 years, a monster that would kill 161 people, injure over 1,150 others, and change a city forever. Joplin, Missouri, population 50,000, a working-class city built on lead and zinc mining, sustained by manufacturing and trucking. The kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names and Sunday afternoons meant church services, family dinners, and lazy conversations on front porches. May 22nd started hot and humid across the southern United States. Meteorologists tracked storm systems, but nothing seemed unusual for late spring in Tornado Alley. The atmosphere, however, was quietly assembling something catastrophic. At 5:17 p.m., tornado sirens began to wail across Joplin. A warning had been issued. 24 minutes. That's all the time people had between the warning and the moment their world would end. For some, it was enough time to take shelter. For others, those precious minutes were stolen by disbelief, by routine, by the dangerous assumption that warnings were just precautions that never materialized into real danger. At St. John's Regional Medical Center, nurses began moving patients into interior hallways. At Joplin High School, about 150 people were still inside after the graduation ceremony, and Principal Carrie Saquetta led them toward the basement.
The tornado ripped through here about 6:30 last evening, less than half an hour after the warning sirens went off. As the search for victims goes on, the death toll is at least 116. The tornado's winds reach close to 200 miles an hour, destroying or damaging about 2,000 homes and businesses, and carrying debris as far as 60 miles away.
Lost my house, lost my garage, lost my friend.
When they say that it sounds like a freight train coming, that's what I'd always heard, but I never... It's exactly what it sounds like, and the house was shaking.
At times, the tornado reached 3/4 of a mile wide, with winds reaching up to 198 miles.
The tornado touched down just west of Joplin at 5:34 p.m., near the intersection of Highway JJ and West 32nd Street. Within 4 minutes, just 4 minutes, it reached EF4 intensity, flattening well-built commercial buildings like they were made of cardboard. Then it strengthened further. EF5, the highest rating on the enhanced Fujita scale, winds exceeding 200 miles per hour, a wedge-shaped monster nearly 1 mile wide, moving at just 10 miles per hour, slow enough to maximize destruction, to tear apart everything in its path with methodical violence. The sound was ungodly. Survivors would struggle to describe it. A freight train, a jet engine, the earth being torn in half. A roar so deep and continuous it drowned out screams, prayers, and final goodbyes. In Pronto Pharmacy, Rance Yoon dove under a sink and held on to the pipes. The building shook, glass exploded. The world outside became a whirling hell of debris.
I said, we don't have much time, we gotta go. And with that, it jerked I was at the front door, it took the door out of my hand and jerked it off. And I said, we don't have time, we've got to get to the bathroom. And so we just headed into the bathroom. At that point, in the center part of the store, we just sat down. She slid to the left side of the toilet. I got to the right. We hung onto the side of the toilet, and I was holding the pipes under the sink. And whole building was coming apart.
But at St. John's Regional Medical Center, there was no peace, only terror. Judy Miller stood in a hallway with her husband and their daughter Julie, who was an inpatient at St. John's. Hospital staff had moved Julie's bed into the corridor, away from windows, following tornado protocols. Then the monster hit. The top 2 stories of the 6-story hospital were ripped away. Every window in the building exploded. Wind and debris poured through the halls at over 200 miles per hour. X-ray machines became missiles. Chairs, medical equipment, and chunks of concrete flew through corridors where patients and staff huddled helplessly. It just seemed like it went on forever, Judy Miller would remember. When it was over, we looked around and it looked like a bomb had gone off in the middle of that building. She saw patients impaled by debris, broken legs, head injuries, blood everywhere. But miraculously, her family had no injuries. Then, Julie said something that made Judy's blood run cold. "Mom, there are no sirens. Nobody's coming." They were on their own. The building was damaged, possibly unstable. They could smell smoke. The door to the stairwell was jammed. They had to move Julie from her hospital bed to a wheelchair and start clearing debris themselves, hoping they could escape before the building collapsed or caught fire. 6 people died in that hospital, but thanks to the heroic actions of healthcare staff who evacuated 183 patients in just 90 minutes from a structurally compromised building with no power, gas leaks, and water everywhere, many more were saved. For 38 minutes, the tornado carved a path of destruction 22 miles long and up to 1 mile wide through Joplin. It was a multiple vortex tornado, several smaller vortices within the larger circulation, which made its destruction pattern even more random and devastating. One street would be completely erased. The next street over would have houses still standing with windows intact. There was no logic to it, no fairness, just chaos. As the tornado crossed Main Street between 20th and 26th Streets, maintaining EF4 intensity, it destroyed every business along that corridor. Entire neighborhoods vanished. Trees were stripped completely of their bark. Reinforced concrete porches were torn away from foundations. Vehicles were thrown several blocks. The Greenbrier nursing home was leveled completely. 21 people died there. Their final moments were spent in darkness and terror, unable to run, unable to escape, at the mercy of a force beyond human comprehension. Joplin High School, where hours before graduates had celebrated their futures, was destroyed. St. Mary's Catholic School and Church, destroyed. Franklin Technical Center, destroyed. Home Depot, destroyed. Walmart Supercenter, destroyed. And Crystal Whiteley, holding her 3 children in that bathtub, felt the tornado pulling at them. She held on with every ounce of strength she had, but the tornado was stronger. Her daughter Shantae was torn from her arms. So was her son Trenton. In an instant, they were gone, pulled into the screaming darkness. Crystal survived. Her daughter Kiana survived, but Shantae was found under a door, killed instantly. Trenton made it to Children's Mercy Hospital in Kansas City, beaten so badly that the family eventually made the impossible decision to take him off life support. She had to hold on to 3 kids, her mother Alita would later say, sobbing. The tornado was so strong, she never did see the kids again. At 6:12 p.m., after 38 minutes on the ground, the tornado finally dissipated. The silence that followed was wrong. Not peaceful, not calm, empty. Those who emerged from basements, bathrooms, and interior hallways stepped into a world transformed. Brian Head, Joplin's city attorney, walked out of his house and couldn't recognize his own neighborhood. He recalled every landmark you knew, every street sign, every tree you were used to being on a certain corner, every house down in that area was just gone. It changed everything that day. The statistics were staggering. 161 people killed, 1,150 injured, Nearly 8,000 buildings damaged, 4,000 homes destroyed, 7,500 residences damaged or destroyed, 15,000 vehicles destroyed, 500 businesses affected, 5,000 employees suddenly jobless, 3 million cubic yards of debris, $2.9 billion in damage, the costliest tornado in U.S. history. 25% of the city was destroyed, 1/3 was damaged, and in that terrible silence, voices began calling names, parents searching for children, children crying for parents, the wounded calling for help that was slow to arrive because roads were impassable and emergency services were overwhelmed. Emergency responders worked through the night searching the rubble for survivors. Governor Nixon deployed the Missouri National Guard. FEMA mobilized. The Red Cross set up shelters. Volunteers poured in from surrounding areas with chainsaws, work gloves, and the willingness to dig through mountains of debris.
At least 8 tornadoes tore through our state last night.
The National Weather Service says that one of those 8 touched down in Crawford County. That's where Rob Sneed went earlier tonight to speak with those who were hit hard by that storm.
By the time the tornado dissipated just southwest of the McMinn County Airport, it had covered 37.3 miles with a maximum width of 800 yards and a maximum wind speed of 190 miles per hour.
For most people, that day began like any other. They had no idea they were living the final hours of their old lives. The streets were alive with routine movement, familiar sounds, and the dangerous comfort of normalcy that makes people blind to approaching death. Parents kissed children goodbye, not knowing if they would see them again. Workers drove to jobs they would never finish. Students sat in classrooms that would soon cease to exist. There was no siren cutting through the air. There was no voice on the radio screaming at people to run for their lives. There was no countdown to zero. There was nothing. What happened next arrived like a predator in the night, without warning, without mercy, and without giving anyone time to understand they were about to die. The morning had betrayed them with clear skies and pleasant temperatures. Weather forecasts promised nothing unusual. Meteorologists smiled through their segments, completely unaware they were sending people into a death trap. The data looked normal. The satellites showed nothing alarming. Every instrument that should have screamed danger remained silent. Natural disasters usually give warnings. Storms are tracked days in advance. Hurricanes are named and feared before they make landfall. Earthquakes sometimes trigger warning systems seconds before the shaking starts. Volcanoes smoke and rumble, giving communities precious time to evacuate. But this disaster was different. It formed in silence, hiding in plain sight, assembling its killing power beneath an atmosphere that looked harmless. By the time anyone realized what was happening, it was already too late for many. Escape routes were closing. Time was running out. Death was already selecting its victims. The atmosphere turned weapon. What meteorologists would later discover made their blood run cold. The atmosphere had been building deadly tension for hours, creating a perfect storm of unstable conditions that happens maybe once in a generation. Warm air was shooting upward like rockets, while freezing air plunged downward, creating a violent collision of forces in the sky above unsuspecting people below. Wind shear was tearing the atmosphere apart at multiple levels. Moisture was being sucked up from the ground, feeding the growing monster. Pressure gradients were reaching extremes that the instruments had rarely recorded. The sky was becoming a bomb, and everyone underneath it had no idea they were standing at ground zero. Scientists looking at the data afterward would use words like unprecedented and catastrophic. They would point to charts that showed how unlikely this combination of factors was. But unlikely doesn't mean impossible. And on that day, impossible became reality. The weapon in the sky found its trigger. The sky breaks. In a single moment, daylight died. Not gradually like sunset, but instantly, as if someone had switched off the sun. The sky turned a color that shouldn't exist in nature, a sickly, bruised darkness that made people's skin crawl with primal fear. Something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. Then the wind came. It didn't build, it didn't warn. It exploded into existence with violence that felt supernatural. The air itself became hostile, transformed from the breath of life into a weapon of mass destruction. It screamed through streets at speeds that turned everything loose into projectiles. The sound was ungodly, a roar so deep and continuous that it felt like the earth was being torn in half. People caught outside had seconds to realize they were going to die. Some did die, struck by debris moving faster than cars, impaled by objects that had been harmless moments before. Others were lifted bodily off the ground, their screams lost in the roar as they tumbled through air that had become a blender of glass, metal, and wood. Windows didn't just break, they exploded inward with such force that the glass became shrapnel, cutting through flesh, blinding people, turning homes into death traps. Trees that had stood for 50 years snapped like toothpicks, their trunks splintering with sounds like gunshots. Telephone poles cracked and fell, bringing down power lines that sparked and whipped through the darkness like electric snakes. The debris cloud was apocalyptic. Stop signs torn from concrete spun through the air like helicopter blades. Roof tiles became throwing stars. Cars were shoved sideways, then lifted, then thrown. A bicycle became a missile. A trash can became a battering ram. Everything that wasn't bolted down, and some things that were, became ammunition in nature's assault. Trapped in the dark. Inside buildings, people experienced their own private nightmares. The power died instantly, plunging thousands into absolute darkness at the exact moment terror took hold. No lights, no phones, no communication with the outside world. Just the sounds of destruction and the feeling that the walls around them might collapse any second. Some tried to run. They grabbed keys with shaking hands and rushed to cars, thinking they could outrun what was happening. They were wrong. Within minutes, roads became impassable graveyards of stalled vehicles. Visibility dropped to arm's length. People couldn't see the road in front of them, couldn't see other cars until they crashed into them, couldn't see the debris that would trap them in place. Some abandoned their vehicles and ran on foot into the chaos. Few of them made it to safety. Running blind in zero visibility through a storm of flying debris is a death sentence written in real time. Some froze where they were, paralyzed by a fear so complete that their bodies simply refused to move. They stood in hallways or huddled under desks, waiting for either salvation or the end. In one house, a family pressed themselves against interior walls as their home began to disintegrate around them. They could hear pieces of their roof being peeled away. They could feel the building shifting on its foundation. The father covered his children with his body, feeling debris hit his back, wondering which impact would be the one that killed him. The mother whispered prayers into the darkness, but her words were swallowed by the roar. The children cried, but no one could hear them. The noise was total, all-consuming, the sound of a world ending. Emergency dispatchers listened helplessly as calls flooded in, panicked voices begging for help that wasn't coming. Please, our house is collapsing. My child is trapped. I can't breathe. Please help us. Please. The dispatchers tried to send help, but emergency vehicles were stuck, roads were blocked, and emergency responders were as helpless as everyone else. People died calling for help that never arrived. The lottery of death. What made the event especially cruel was its randomness. Death played favorites based on nothing but geography and chance. One house would be obliterated, erased so completely that afterward, people couldn't tell where it stood. The house next door would survive with minor damage. One family lost everything: home, possessions, and members they would bury in the coming days. Their neighbors across the street watched through intact windows, survivor's guilt already beginning its corrosive work on their minds. There was no pattern, no fairness, no logic. The disaster carved paths of total destruction through neighborhoods, leaving islands of survival that made no sense. Why did it turn at that intersection? Why did it intensify over this block, but weaken over that one? The answers existed in atmospheric physics and chaos theory, but unlikely didn't mean impossible. And on that day, impossible became reality. The weapon in the sky found its trigger. The aftermath of silence. When the core of the disaster finally passed, it left behind a silence that was somehow worse than the noise had been. The sudden absence of sound felt like pressure in the ears, disorienting and wrong. Then, slowly, other sounds filtered in. Distant sirens that sounded hollow and useless, the electrical snap and crackle of damaged power lines, car alarms bleeding pointlessly, and voices. Desperate, broken voices calling names into ruins that no longer looked like anywhere anyone had known. Sarah, Dad, Mom, help! Is anyone there? Please. Some of those names would never be answered. People emerged from wherever they had hidden, stepping into an alien landscape. Survivors described the same feeling, the uncanny sensation that they had been transported somewhere else, because surely this wasteland couldn't be their neighborhood. Their minds struggled to process the transformation. Buildings leaned at impossible angles, facades torn away to reveal interior rooms like dollhouses split and open. Vehicles were stacked in piles, flipped upside down, or embedded in structures. Trees lay scattered like scattered matches, roots torn from earth that looked scraped raw. The ground itself had been rearranged, with dirt and debris distributed by forces beyond human comprehension. Personal items created the most disturbing landscape. A child's teddy bear sat pristine in the middle of a street of rubble. Family photos fluttered past like sad butterflies, images of happy moments now separated forever from the people in them. Wedding dresses hung from power lines like ghosts. Birthday cards were scattered across yards that no longer had houses attached to them. And there were other things too, things people didn't talk about but couldn't forget. The implications of certain shapes in certain places. The knowledge that some people were still out there but would never be found alive.